why even the average person should care about this to a screaming degree. There's an idea that you say, but you go by quickly, that I think if people understood, it's really going to help them. So you've said, I want to see the entire world recapitalize in Bitcoin. Now, when you say recapitalize, is what you mean, hey, that part of your wealth that you want to store to maintain purchasing power over time, all of that, instead of being in real estate, instead of being in treasuries, instead of being in equities, that should move over to Bitcoin? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. Yeah, you've articulated that quite well.
Welcome on in, Blue Chip Crypto 3. We're going to do, this is the part 3 of Michael Saylor and impact theory. They did a wonderful job on doing the Bitcoin revolution and introduce you to the concept of Bitcoin and what it actually means and what's the pros and what's the cons. It's more upsides than downside. And so let's get started. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave some comments down below. Let me know what you think about Bitcoin. Buckle up, put on your seatbelts, buckle up. It's time to take off. We're headed to the moon.
Yes, recap, build your house on a firm foundation. Don't build it on sinking sand. Don't build it on a swamp. Build it on a granite rock, on schist. And I guess if I could give the math, the risk-free rate of the dollar, if you're capitalized on US dollars and you were to say buy treasury bonds, the risk-free rate is something close to SOFR, or the standard overnight funding rate. And, you know, that ranges, but after you get paid that rate and you get taxed on it, you know, you might get paid 5%. You get to keep 3% after tax. Maybe if you're tax-free, you get 4.5%. And if you're taxed, you get 3%. So the risk-free rate of return of your capital on that dollar standard is like in the 3% range. The risk-free rate for Bitcoin, as I just described it to you, 29% over 21 years, about 30%. So the way I look at investments is, when you're pitching me an investment idea, I say, well, I've got a lot of money in Bitcoin and I'm expecting about 30% risk-free for the next 20 years. You have to actually pitch me an idea that generates more than 30%, plus the risk premium, plus the tax efficiency. If you told me, here's a thing that'll make me 50% a year, but it was going to be taxable, that might be 40% a year or 35% a year. And I'm like, well, after the risk, it's still not as good as my risk-free rate of 30%. So if you're capitalized on Bitcoin, if you understand it, and if you understand, if you have a long time horizon, if you're going to hold it more than 4 years, you don't care about the volatility. All you care about is the annualized return. The annualized return.
Hold on, because there's
right?
a lot of assumptions in there. So I know a lot of people are clutching their pearls right now about Bitcoin being referred to as risk-free. So can you break down for us the difference between that volatility and then how you can have the confidence to look at this and say, no, the risk is merely a timeline question? Because I think a lot of people will take exception to that.
As a marketing consultant, staying close to my clients is a huge part of the job. That's why I love HoneyBook.
That kind of made sense, but let's continue.
Yeah. So, well, the dollar is zero ARR, zero volatility. That is to say, the dollar goes up 0% against itself each year, and the dollar is zero volatility against itself each year. So if you're on the dollar, you're living in flat land, and you're a stationary person in flat land, a pedestrian in flat land. Bitcoin is going up 60% a year against the dollar. How long? Well, since MicroStrategy made its first investment 4 years ago, it's 60%. But if you stretch back 6, 8, 10 years, I think it's also 60%. So like a decade. But you can measure it back a decade and you see it's going up 60% a year. and it's 60 volatility. It's a 60 vol against the dollar. So you should think of Bitcoin as an asset. It's like you're on a speeding train going 60 miles an hour, and you've got a flywheel spinning 60 RPM. And the pedestrian on flat land is standing on the plane watching the train go by, thinking this is scary. It's going to suck the oxygen out of my lungs. And they're thinking, my money isn't an asset because it goes up 0% a year. So they have a different view toward money than the view of someone on the Bitcoin train. The person with $1 million of cash is going to have $1 million of cash in a decade. A person with $1 million of Bitcoin is going to double their capital every 18 months if they just hold on to it, right? And so they're going to double it once, twice, 3, 4 times at that rate, right? The volatility
But this really
itself,
does come down.
And y'all see the difference between holding cash versus holding Bitcoin. Now, this is a learning experience, right? So I plan on going over a lot of videos, audio reaction videos of a lot of things about Bitcoin to let y'all know this is the new way. You got new money, you got old money. You got something called DeFi, which it allows you to do peer-to-peer, so you no longer need the bank because you become the bank. So these are the things that Bitcoin allows you to do. These are the things that cryptocurrency allow you to do. And I look at it like if the kids are going to use it, which means that the future is bright because they're going to use it. They use it so much now. Let's continue.
Down to, sorry, and I'll let you get back to that.
Yeah.
But this does come down to a belief that when you look into the future, that the setup that makes it have the 60% ARR is going to continue. Because I look at this and I say the only reason that it has that kind of reward is that it is volatile, that there are question marks. Because if there were no question marks, everyone would flood in near instantly. It would hit homeostasis, and that would be that. So I think Bitcoin is anything but risk-free, but I do think that the volatility is advantageous for the people who are going to be right if people are right about the upside. That's the most fair way to say it. Why do you think the best way to conceptualize this is as risk-free?
Howard Marks would say volatility is not risk. Volatility is volatility, right? A merry-go-round, or a carnival ride or a roller coaster is volatile. The risk part is if you fly off the roller coaster, right? If the merry-go-round stops working, etc. So the fundamental risk of Bitcoin is the existential risk of an extinction level event and Bitcoin, right? If space aliens come down and say, we're taking your Bitcoin away from you, right? Then I guess there's risk. If some evil genius finds a way to create a cyber virus that infects and destroys the Bitcoin network instantly, irrevocably, that is the risk. So, but that's kind of like that's the existential risk you take when you get on the airplane. If it crashes, that's the existential risk you take when you cross the street. That's the existential risk you take when you put a piece of food in your mouth. And I say, and you say, well, can you imagine that hurting me? And I say, yeah, if I put poison in the food, you're dead. Okay, so do you trust me? Do you trust the waiter when you put the food in your mouth, right? So yes, there is some risk in life. And the existential risk is that extinction level event.
You don't think there's another layer of risk in that, not existential, because you're saying the risk-free return of Bitcoin is 60%. But I think there is, it seems strange to me to not allocate some percentage of, maybe it doesn't grow that fast. Maybe it doesn't remain 60%. You yourself say over the next, 21 years, it's going to come down. It'll average out over about 29%. What if that accelerates and the return ends up being substantively less than that? So I get saying that this has a better chance of having a higher annual rate of return than, say, the S&P 500, which maybe we clock at 15%. We say, nah.
I think Michael Saylor is right on this one, because you even have, as far as this is allegedly that the government is going to start using Bitcoin as a strategic reserve. You already have the BRIC nation that's already using crypto to its full potential. You have a lot of government and countries that want to participate in this, so it's a race for it. It's only 6% of it left. 6%. So the last Bitcoin we get mined in like 20 years. It's only 6% of it left. Every 4 years it has a half, and so it cut the supply in half. So what side are you guys on? Are you guys on the Bitcoin side? Are you on the fiat currency side? Because this is an important time in history.
We might not hit 60%, but we're probably not going to drop below 15%. Therefore, if 15% is our hurdle rate, it's going to be something north of that. But I think where people trip up with your language is this idea of the inevitability of the 60%. What would you say to that?
So we're dealing with three concepts: risk, volatility, and performance. Okay, so I've addressed the risk issue by pointing out that there is existential risk in your given network or frame of reference. And I just want to make that point that once you understand that risk of being in that frame of reference, then you have to figure out what's the source of the volatility and the performance. And if you don't understand why the asset does what it does, if you don't understand the economic physics involved, then you'll think it's random, and you'll feel like the performance is risky. But I want to give you an example of a physical metaphor.
So, for example, I'm on stage right now, I'm just talking, and Dinah's sat there and she's now filming what I'm saying. So I'm doing the work.
I'm a hiker, and I come across a mountain lake, and the mountain lake has 500 trillion gallons of water in it. And yeah, I don't know how it got there, but it's there. The water's chilly. It's
one thing about Michael Saylor, I could say he has the best metaphors, the best, because he have to get you to relate to it. And look how many times he sighed about how much time he took a deep breath, because it's like he have to go over this so many times. But that's part of actually bringing a new concept to people, to the mass amount of people, because 98% of people still don't get it yet. I kind of say the same thing to people, and they don't get it yet. So, I'm not mad or angry at that, because if you present a new idea to someone that's used to old programming or doing the same thing over and over, or just used to a certain program, they could be wealthy, they could be well off. It doesn't matter. When you present a new idea, you have to do it in different ways that may be particular to a certain class of people, a certain style, or maybe it's the language barrier, or maybe you have to reduce the verbiage and make it like less, as far as like don't use sophisticated word, use like a third grade, fourth grade language. Maybe some people aren't audio listeners. You can't just get someone off just listening to something. Some people are just visual. Some people need both. Some people need actually hands-on experience with Bitcoin. Some people, the more and more I talk about it, the more hours you spend with it, the more and more you understand it. But the first hour or 2, 3, 4, 500 hours, you will probably be in doubt. After you pass that 100 hours, to 1,000 hours, you're like, whoa, okay. After that, you're all for it. Once you understand everything about it. Let's continue.
clear. And I look down, and there's a waterfall coming off the mountain lake. And the waterfall, it's very beautiful, and it's very turbulent, right? Water is turbulent in a waterfall. Water is not turbulent in a glassy lake. So the turbulence is volatility, right? And there's waterfall. And then I look at it, and now if you look and you say, I don't know why that water falls downhill. I don't know if it'll keep falling downhill, but I hate the volatility. Then I guess you can take a selfie in front of the lake, go swimming, get cold, and leave. But if, let's say you're not a tourist, but you're an engineer. So you come across the same lake, and you see the waterfall, and you see the 500 trillion gallons, and you think about gravity, and you think about sunlight, And now I know how the water got there. The water got there because the sun.
Do you see how many times Michael Saylor sigh? He's like, I have to do this again and again and again and again. But it's part of it. This is literally part of it. It's worth the sigh to me. This man's making billions.
Shown on the ocean, the water evaporated from the ocean. It rose up in the clouds. The wind blew it against the mountain. It condensed and it rained into the mountain, and the water ran off the mountain into the mountain lake. I know how it got there. And then I think, well, if I create a dam near that waterfall, I build myself a dam, I put a turbine on the dam, and then I drop 1 billion gallons of water. I channel 1 billion gallons of water through the dam, drop it 60 feet. And then I plug that into a hydroelectric power plant. I spin the dynamo, I make electricity. And then if I'm really smart, I run the electric power line to a village down in the valley, and I light up the village or I light up the city. Now, someone can come along that doesn't understand physics, and they can say, good idea, Junior, but what are you going to do when the water stops flowing downhill? Well, I'm like, well, I actually think the water's flowing downhill because of gravity. Newton solved that for me. And then someone else comes along and says, good idea, Junior, but what are you going to do when you run out of water in the lake? I'm like, well, there's 500 trillion gallons, and I take out my calculator and 1 billion gallons or whatever. It's going to last a long time. Like, well, it's eventually going to run out. I say, well, the sun keeps shining on the ocean, and the ocean keeps lifting the water out of the ocean, and it drops it on this mountain. And that's why there's water in the mountain. But you're right. There's some kind of natural limit. And I suppose there's a limit to the amount of energy I can pull off of this dam, but it's a large number. It's a lot more than your donkey cart, and it's a lot more than your steam, wood stove, and it's a lot more than your coal power plant. And maybe it's a lot cleaner than burning, gasoline. So I'm an engineer, and you're seeing performance thinking it's random, and that's why it's going to stop. And you're seeing volatility, and you're thinking it's random, and maybe it'll stop. And here with Bitcoin, the reason Bitcoin's performing is A, it's volatile, but B, it's a more energy efficient state. The water is flowing down 5,000 feet because it's a lower energy state 1,000 feet below the mountain. It's a lower energy state. You've got potential energy in the water, and it wants to go to ground, and that's just physics. The 500 trillion gallons of water is $500 trillion. And the $500 trillion of assets are sitting in real estate and currency and sovereign bonds and corporate bonds and artwork and equity. And they're invested in the stock of a company in Africa that's going bankrupt, right? They're invested in real estate in Cuba, in Venezuela, in Nigeria. They're sitting in a warehouse that's crumbling. It's got a 40-year life. And so entropy and inflation, you invested $100 billion in a war zone, and then a war broke out, and your money got your asset got devalued. All of the things going on in the world, the war, the chaos, the competition, the inflation, the entropy, the passage of time, the hurricane, the COVID, vaccine, the COVID virus, all of these things impaired the value of your assets. The reason Bitcoin is going up, it's not an accident. It's because capital is economic mass. It is flowing from a high energy state, the mountaintop, to a lower energy state, to a more efficient state. It is steam condensing to water, condensing to ice, giving on.
Now, some people may not understand it, but what he's saying is that it's here to stay. It's fundamentally can solve the debt crisis. The thing about it is adaptability. People aren't used to it yet. It's only 1% of the world that understand this, right? What happens when it's 3%? What happens when it's 7%? What happens when these things increases? When people actually understand the technology behind it, when people actually understand the use case behind it. And it's not just Bitcoin. is simply crypto and the ones that's considered utility. But leave your thoughts down below. I really want to know what you thought about this one. We're going to keep breaking this down in 20 to 30-minute segments so you guys can replay it back, and feel free to comment on it. Once again, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, hit the share button, and let's prepare to blast off. We're headed to the